What if I told you the biggest obstacle to your 2025 goals isn't laziness, poor planning, or even procrastination? It's shame. Not the small kind you feel after missing a deadline, but the deeper belief that who you are will never be enough. Nietzsche warned about this more than a century ago, and today we see it everywhere, in toxic workplace cultures, in imposter syndrome, and in the endless chase for perfection. In this video, we'll unpack why shame quietly destroys productivity, and more importantly, how you can replace it with practical strategies that free up your energy and focus. The hidden cost of shame on your productivity. In 2025, research on workplace well-being shows an undercurrent that's easy to miss. Lost productivity isn't only about distractions or shorter attention spans, it's also about what people are carrying silently with them. Nearly half of employees worry they'll be judged if they talk about mental health at work, and 42% fear it could harm their careers. 1 in 4 has even thought about quitting for this reason, and 7% actually have. That fear, that quiet weight of shame and stigma, pulls directly on productivity and retention. It disguises itself as procrastination or fatigue, but underneath, it's the anxiety of never quite being enough. That anxiety slows down decisions, fuels avoidance, and builds into burnout. Workplaces without proactive training confirm this. 38% of employees say shame linked to mental health hurt their productivity, compared to just 21% in workplaces that had supportive training. The difference shows how much the hidden cost of shame is shaping work in 2025. Yet most of us still frame productivity losses as a technical problem. A day slips away? Download another task app. Inbox chaos? Add a more advanced system of filters and flags. Running late? Set up new time trackers. These tools bring short bursts of order, but they rarely address the quiet drain underneath. A useful way to picture it is a bucket riddled with holes. Adding more water, another workflow fix, feels productive, but the leaks are never patched. The leaks are the shame-soaked moments when you stare at a message before hitting send because you don't think it's polished enough, or the hesitation that keeps you from starting a project because you expect it won't measure up. Apps and hacks help structure tasks, but they can't remove the silent belief that you aren't good enough. That belief keeps emptying the bucket no matter how much you pour in. Nietzsche's insight into shame offers a frame for this. He warned that freedom is blocked not by external systems, but by internal chains. Productivity advice today often emphasizes discipline, routines, or perfected systems, yet those strategies can't undo the self-criticism driving hesitation and exhaustion. When leaders overlook this, the numbers bear out the consequences: higher turnover, more disengagement, and a workforce running at half capacity. But there's a hopeful angle as well. Just as Nietzsche suggested freedom comes by moving beyond shame, workplaces that normalize open conversations see measurable gains. In companies that provide training, not only does productivity loss shrink, but employees report a 10-point drop in fears of judgment. That shift is what real freedom at work looks like. It cuts the invisible costs of shame and makes effort more efficient than any productivity hack. Think of how this plays out in everyday tasks. One employee starts her morning weighed down by the belief that she's not smart enough for the role. She hesitates before sending emails, asks for constant reassurance, and works around the main priority to avoid mistakes. By noon, her energy is gone even though she's barely made progress. Another employee with the same to-do list starts without carrying that shame. He still has problems to solve, but decisions feel lighter and tasks flow faster. Both had the same hours, but their outcomes couldn't be more different. Now pause and ask yourself, which of those mornings feels more familiar? The difference isn't about tools, discipline, or even raw talent. It's about whether shame was in the room. The irony is that most productivity advice headlines with bold promises save 10 hours a week, double your output overnight. But shame erases far more hours than any system can ever restore. An email that should take 5 minutes stretches into 30 as self-doubt takes over. A meeting replays in your head for the rest of the afternoon until you're too drained to focus. Week after week, this hidden tax on your attention adds up. Multiply that across a team, and the inefficiency is not just a matter of distraction, but of shame directing everyone's energy towards self-protection rather than progress. By comparison, when shame triggers are reduced, tasks happen in a fraction of the time. The hours saved come not from speed tricks, but from removing the mental load that stretches every activity. This rising cost is especially sharp in the 2025 workplace. Work and self-image are now almost inseparable. Online profiles, performance dashboards, and live comparisons against peers create a constant pressure to prove worth. In this environment, it's no surprise that even employees who complete long lists of tasks feel like they've fallen short. External systems meant to track progress easily morph into mirrors of inadequacy. Here, Nietzsche's warning that shame keeps us prisoners to society's ideals is visible in everyday dashboards. The ideals reflected back aren't necessarily personal values, they're imposed standards, rankings, and measures that push people into cycles of self-blame. The outcome is predictable: shame grows, energy drops, and burnout accelerates. So when solutions are reduced to more discipline or stricter time blocking, they only solve the problem. Structure has value, but it cannot cover over the internal leak. Nietzsche's framing highlights that real gains come less from optimizing the outer system and more from dismantling the inner critic. The data supports this. Workplaces courageous enough to train managers and normalize mental health conversations see clear benefits in retention and productivity. What philosophy suggested in theory, research now confirms in practice. And this points to the practical takeaway: cutting shame isn't just a moral or philosophical choice. It's a measurable improvement in efficiency. Fewer hours lost to loops of self-doubt. Less burnout pushing people out the door early. More consistent energy spent on actual work rather than rehearsing mistakes. This is what the hidden cost of shame looks like. It disguises itself within wasted time and fatigue until you see how much it steals. What matters now is recognizing how shame shows up in daily experience. It doesn't always arrive as a dramatic crisis. Often, it attaches itself to ordinary moments: the pause before an email, the tension before a meeting, the fatigue in the middle of the day that feels disproportionate to what you've done. These moments are small but constant, and like carrying a weight you can't put down, they drag behind every task. That weight is where we need to look next. Why shame feels like carrying a backpack of bricks. Picture shame as strapping on a backpack already loaded with bricks the moment you begin the day. Before you even open your first document or respond to a single message, you're weighed down. The tools you use, time-blocked calendars, coffee, productivity apps, can't offset it because the bricks aren't in the work itself. They're in the thoughts shaping how you approach it. Each step feels cumbersome, every task drags, and the drain multiplies the longer the load is carried. The contents of that backpack are familiar. I'm not good enough. They're all ahead of me. I should already know how to handle this. Each thought adds another heavy brick. Instead of simply doing the work, you carry endless self-critique on top of it. That's why a 5-minute email can take 30 minutes. The cursor blinks, you revise and reread, you hesitate before pressing send. The task itself is simple, but shame stretches it into a drawn-out cycle of self-doubt. Multiply that by dozens of interactions in a single day, and shame quietly taxes hours that no calendar will ever account for. This hidden tax extends beyond timing. It corrodes self-trust. Even when hard evidence suggests your contributions are solid, projects finished, recognition received, you find reasons to dismiss it. Positive feedback doesn't land because shame insists it's mistaken. The erosion is steady, every accomplishment questioned, every success reduced. And once you start believing nothing is enough, motivation for the next challenge evaporates before you even arrive at it. A common mistake is mislabeling shame as discipline. At first glance, the inner voice of criticism can feel like high standards demanding better work. But there's a crucial difference. Discipline keeps attention on the task and flows from genuine values. Shame redirects that energy inward, attacking the self instead of clarifying the next step. One fuels useful effort, the other grinds it down. When this confusion sets in, you may believe shame is a requirement for excellence, when in reality, it's the constant resistance slowing you down. The turning point lies in seeing shame for what it is: an added weight, not a necessary condition for good work. Productivity doesn't gain from it. Once you identify it as external to the task itself, you create space to set it down. Imagine realizing that much of your exhaustion doesn't come from the workload, but from the bricks you've been carrying unnecessarily. Suddenly, the same distance feels lighter. Not because the path has shortened, but because you aren't hauling extra weight with every step. This isn't only a metaphor. The data from 2025 makes it clear. Nearly half of employees worry they'll be judged if they discuss mental health at work, and 42% fear career consequences if they admit they're struggling. Only 13% felt safe enough to tell a manager their mental health had impacted productivity in the past year. 1 in 4 considered quitting because of these pressures, and 7% actually did. In workplaces without structured mental health training, 38% of employees reported shame and stigma harming productivity. In workplaces where training and support were present, that number dropped to 21%. Training also led to a measurable 10-point reduction in fear of judgment. These aren't abstract figures, they confirm that the extra load of shame is making the workday heavier and directly cutting output. Consider a simple example. Two coworkers draft the same routine report. One completes it once the requirements are met, checks it over with confidence, and sends it off. The other doubts every sentence, cycles through multiple unnecessary rewrites, and delays submission for hours. The finished product is identical, but one ends fresh enough to move forward, while the other is exhausted from needless rework. Over weeks and months, the second person falls behind, not because they lacked time or ability, but because shame consumed their margin. The data simply validates what this example illustrates. Supporting people to work without judgment makes them more effective, less drained, and less at risk of leaving altogether. The effects ripple through teams as well. In an environment ruled by shame, people begin performing roles instead of showing up authentically. They overcompensate, exaggerate productivity, or stay silent rather than risk small mistakes. It creates a landscape of facades where collaboration declines, creativity narrows, and valuable voices stay quiet. By contrast, when shame is less present, openness increases. Time spent on appearances and self-protection is reclaimed and redirected to solving actual problems. The very dynamics of cooperation grow stronger with the weight removed. The backpack metaphor reminds us that shame is not neutral. It always adds unnecessary drag. It doesn't matter if the role is junior or senior, the form of the bricks changes, but their effect remains constant. They slow decisions, dilute focus, and drain capacity for sustained effort. Once you see the bricks for what they are, you have the option to stop carrying them. The work itself doesn't change, but the experience of doing it shifts dramatically, and the immediate benefit is tangible. Shedding that invisible weight is often the difference between ending a day exhausted but unfulfilled, or tired yet satisfied with forward movement. More focus, fewer wasted hours, and greater readiness for tomorrow's demands follow naturally. You lose nothing essential by laying down shame. You only regain what was already yours: energy, clarity, and the capacity to work without carrying invisible penalties. This realization sets up the next challenge. If shame is the heavy load slowing us down, what is piling more bricks into the backpack day after day? Often, it's not the core work itself, but the pressure of meeting constant external expectations. Those subtle messages about what you should be doing, who you should be by now, and how you should measure success. And those pressures shape the way we build our approach to productivity in the first place. The trap of shoulds in 2025. Walk into any bookstore or scroll through productivity advice in 2025, and one thing stands out immediately. Nearly everything is framed as a should. You should wake before sunrise. You should keep a spotless journal. You should meditate for 20 minutes. You should log 10,000 steps. You should color code your schedule. You should launch a side hustle while excelling at your full-time position. On paper, these prescriptions look like motivation, but underneath them is the same small word repeated over and over: should. Living like this means every morning begins already stacked against you. No matter how much effort you've put in, it feels like you are falling short. The underlying issue isn't the desire to improve. Most people genuinely want habits that give energy instead of draining it. The real question is where these standards come from. In 2025, they are shaped by constant exposure to curated routines and polished success stories. Social media amplifies this until it's no longer advice, but a model of how life must look to count as successful. A post doesn't just suggest starting the day early, it shows someone with perfect lighting, immaculate surroundings, and a narrative that their entire success rests on that exact behavior. What lingers is not inspiration, but comparison. If you aren't matching that model, you feel like you're behind. This is the subtle power of the should. It wears the mask of improvement while planting the suspicion that who you are now isn't enough. Workplaces add their own layer. With time tracking platforms and team dashboards, performance becomes not only your progress, but your visibility against others. A colleague who logs more hours or completes tasks quicker is algorithmically spotlighted. Without meaning to, you start shaping your value around whether you match them. Suddenly, your attention shifts. Instead of asking whether you contributed in a meaningful way, you measure whether you look like that highlighted case. Another unspoken rule appears: you should be faster, you should sacrifice breaks, you should structure yourself to mimic whoever gets attention. Supervisors often reinforce this without realizing, praising the ideal worker, sending the signal that to belong you need to copy their tempo. That imitation comes at a cost. Your own strengths and rhythms disappear under someone else's template. These expectations fit the pattern Nietzsche warned about long before dashboards and feeds multiplied them. Shoulds are by nature prescriptions from elsewhere. They ask you to measure yourself against someone else's criteria, not your own. Real freedom, he suggested, comes when you stop chasing borrowed ideals and act instead from values that actually belong to you. Imagine orienting your day toward goals that carry personal meaning rather than ticking off arbitrary checkboxes. One approach feels heavy before you even begin because you're working under compulsion. The other feels lighter because every action pushes you toward something that you chose yourself. The cycle of should-based living has another quiet cost. It guarantees dissatisfaction. Imagine committing fully to an ideal morning routine. You check every requirement: early alarm, exercise, journaling, perfectly portioned breakfast, a planner filled with tracked hours. You sustain it for weeks or even months. But what comes after? Soon, a new trend or expectation rises. You take a break, miss a metric, and suddenly it feels like you ruined the chain. Even if you maintain the streak flawlessly, you might realize it hasn't carried you closer to what you actually wanted. More organization and more steps are fine, but if your deeper goals were to build meaning in your career, connect in relationships, or uncover creative energy, they may remain untouched. This is the paradox. Effort is real. Progress feels absent. Because the benchmarks weren't yours to begin with, there's no lasting satisfaction in meeting them. Think of childhood, when choices came from curiosity rather than obligation. Children don't yet live by shoulds. They pursue what attracts them: play, exploration, learning by trial. The shoulds accumulate later. Parents establish rules, schools define standards, peers enforce norms. Gradually, those structures feel natural. By adulthood, many people adopt them without question. Success then looks like replicating the path taken by visible achievers, not discovering what aligns with their own drives. Nietzsche pointed out that such a system isn't liberation at all. It's a cage constructed of borrowed expectations, one that convinces people that surrendering self-direction is a mark of virtue. In today's work, the shape of this cage can be subtle but stressful. You might push harder not because the project calls for it, but because another employee stays late and you believe you should too. Or perhaps you polish a constant flow of status updates, trying to maintain a personal brand that outwardly proves productivity while internally adding little. In each instance, value is measured against appearance rather than genuine direction. The real self is displaced by the performance of being enough in the eyes of others. Over time, that displacement eats energy. You are busy, yet hollowed out, active, yet disconnected from what matters. Nietzsche's alternative is not a rejection of discipline or structure, but a redirection of them. Structure only serves when it grows from inner values rather than imposed scripts. Goals that come from authenticity demand less forced effort because they carry their own momentum. The metaphor is like harnessing the wind behind you. The direction fits your course, so you move further with less exertion. Instead of dragging through tasks defined by external approval, you see purpose in each one because it fits a larger arc you designed. The improvement isn't abstract. It gives more consistent focus, steadier motivation, and productivity that holds rather than collapses after a sprint. Research reinforces this distinction. Studies on motivation highlight that goals framed around personal growth and process, the want to type, lead to better persistence and outcomes than rigid, streak-based should goals. In practice, this means productivity improves when the compass points toward chosen values rather than imposed quotas. It explains why some seemingly driven people burn out quickly, while others sustain effort for years without collapse. The difference isn't raw capacity. It is whether their energy flows from inner alignment or external obligation. Consider a practical example. You see online challenges to read 50 books in a year. You set the goal, measure your progress, accumulate titles to meet the number. By December, you succeed. Yet in hindsight, many of the books are barely remembered, skimmed only to complete the count. Now imagine a variation. Instead of a volume challenge, you shape the goal around a value: your curiosity about history, your desire to build skills for a shift in work, or your drive to deepen insight into relationships. Maybe the total is fewer books, yet each one is absorbed, annotated, reshaping how you think. In the first case, the triumph is numerical. In the second, the gain is lasting. The output measured in numbers is less, but the actual productivity, the creation of insight, motivation, and new directions, is higher. That difference shows why cutting away from should-based living is not about abandoning improvement. It's about discarding measures that exhaust without reward. The planners, the apps, the habits all remain tools. They become supportive when tied into values, parasitic when driven by comparisons. Without this distinction, productivity becomes a treadmill, constant movement with little progress. With it, the same energy converts into satisfaction and momentum. The cost of living in shoulds is unseen hours lost to chasing appearances. The return of shifting to values is time that feels both used and replenishing. And the shift matters more in 2025 than ever. With every scroll, with each dashboard, and with every framework of comparison, the volume of shoulds has increased. Ignoring them is no longer passive. It requires active choice to ask, do I want this, or do I feel pressured to want it? The answer determines whether energy multiplies or drains away. But as important as that choice is, the weight of shoulds doesn't only appear in big, obvious ways. It also hides itself in ordinary, daily decisions. That smaller influence can often be the most insidious because you may not recognize it until it has already pulled hours from your attention. Spotting shame-based thinking in your daily routine. Shame-based thinking doesn't usually make itself known through dramatic breakdowns or obvious crises. More often, it slips into the everyday routine in ways that appear so ordinary you almost miss them. It's the quick flash of guilt when you close Slack to focus for an hour. It's the nagging thought that taking a full lunch break means you're falling behind. It's the pressure that even a walk outside is indulgent unless you've already exhausted yourself at your desk. Shame rarely shouts. It whispers, disguising itself as responsibility, pushing you to keep proving your worth long after you've done enough. What makes this harder to notice is that shame often looks similar to discipline. In both cases, you push yourself, you work despite discomfort, you put in extra effort. But what feels like dedication on the surface is often powered by very different motives. True discipline grows from purpose. You've decided something matters, and your effort matches that choice. Shame comes from fear that without this effort, someone will think less of you, or you'll think less of yourself. The two drivers lead to very different outcomes, even though to the outside world the behaviors might look the same. A simple test cuts through the confusion. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to, or because I feel I should? This small question can expose what's really fueling your work. Imagine exercising because you want to feel stronger and more energized. Now compare that to working out because you should, to avoid feeling judged or falling behind others. The external action is identical, but the inner experience is completely different. One choice builds motivation you can sustain. The other drains motivation and leaves you resenting the activity. Burnout rarely comes from effort alone. Most often it comes from living by shoulds that leach the energy out of every task. The same filter works for everyday work habits. Do you respond instantly to messages because you want steady collaboration, or because you're afraid of being seen as unresponsive? Do you sign up for extra projects because the subject excites you, or because you feel pressure to prove you're valuable? When you pause and trace that reasoning, you often find shame has tied itself to your choices. These aren't moral failings, they're habits shaped by fear of judgment, and they show up in subtle but consistent ways. Shame takes extra energy because each decision comes with more than just the task itself. When shame drives the action, you're not only doing the work, you're also imagining an unseen judge, rehearsing potential criticism, and trying to prevent disappointment before it arrives. That invisible performance runs in the background of your mind and quietly drains your capacity. A task that should take 15 minutes stretches into an hour of worry and second guessing. On paper, the job is still small, but in practice, it feels heavy. This is one of the most direct ways shame steals productivity. It layers invisible weight on top of what would otherwise be routine. Another clue to shame-based thinking is its ability to create false urgency. Fear insists that everything must happen immediately or you're falling short. You check emails within minutes, not because the work requires it, but because you're anxious about appearing inattentive. You resist even short breaks because rest feels like slacking. False urgency keeps your nervous system in constant overdrive, leaving you drained without any proportional output. A practical check here is simple. Ask, does acting right now serve the work, or am I afraid of being judged if I wait? That one pause can prevent shame from hijacking your pace. When you begin spotting these patterns in your routine, you take back clarity. You realize how many everyday moments are powered by fear rather than genuine intention. Maybe you notice that the late-night work you consider dedication often comes from anxiety about appearing less committed than your peers. Maybe you recognize that even when you take a break, your mind is busy with guilt, which means you don't truly recharge. These insights are important because they shift shame from being an invisible driver to being something you can call out. Once you see it clearly, you regain the choice to act differently. This doesn't mean every unwanted duty should magically become exciting. No one jumps out of bed eager to sort through spreadsheets or deal with routine chores. But even with unglamorous tasks, reframing makes a difference. I have to do this or I've failed is shame. I want to complete this so that tomorrow has more space for what matters is purpose. The first tightens the body and mind, increasing resistance. The second makes the same task feel lighter because the energy behind it aligns with your own goals. Small shifts in framing keep you from wasting effort on cycles of self-attack. The benefit of identifying shame-based thinking is not just psychological, it's practical. It explains why you can feel exhausted even after a day of relatively simple tasks. Often it isn't the workload itself that burns you out. It's the extra layer of fear stacked on top, forcing you to second-guess every move. By spotting that voice, you start separating genuine effort from unnecessary self-doubt. You work the same hours, but you finish with more energy left. The cycle of depletion weakens because shame is no longer siphoning your focus. Over time, this practice creates a subtle but powerful change. Routine no longer feels like pushing through endless resistance. Breaks actually refresh you instead of leaving you guilt-ridden. Difficult tasks require effort, but they don't leave you with the sense of never measuring up. You begin to notice that sustainable discipline doesn't drain, it guides. Shame, by contrast, leaves you with emptiness no matter how hard you've worked. Recognizing that difference is what allows you to keep momentum in the long run instead of running on borrowed energy. Many people think the only way forward is to force through shame with greater toughness. They double down, hoping that suppressing the discomfort will keep them productive. But this isn't resilience, it's a strategy that backfires. Shame doesn't disappear under pressure. It gets reinforced, creating higher expectations and greater fatigue. Real resilience begins not with more pressure, but with the awareness to step back and notice what's driving you. Once shame is on the surface, you can stop treating it as discipline and start making choices aligned with real priorities. In personal life, these patterns can be shifted one task at a time. At work, they often scale up into culture. An individual's quiet guilt can easily become a team's ongoing anxiety when managers confuse shame with commitment. What feels like small personal habits gradually shapes how an organization operates. The effects are measurable, not only on well-being, but on output. And when those costs become widespread, they don't remain hidden for long. Because shame doesn't just eat away at individual routines, it has consequences across whole workplaces. The new evidence: shame is bad for business. In 2025, new polling highlighted how stigma around mental health is reshaping the workplace. Nearly half of employees said they worried they'd be judged if they disclosed mental health struggles at work. 42% feared that being open could damage their careers. Only 13% reported telling a manager that their mental health had affected their productivity in the past year. 1 in 4 considered quitting because of these pressures, and 7% actually left their jobs. These aren't abstract numbers. They reveal how strongly stigma and shame are tied to turnover, silence, and lost productivity. Workplaces that failed to address this carried greater hidden costs. While those offering mental health training and support reported measurable advantages, employees were less likely to fear judgment, and productivity losses were reported by 21% compared to 38% in workplaces without training. The data makes one point clear. Cultures that normalize shame aren't just hurting morale, they're paying for it in hours, retention, and engagement. Many organizations still operate on the assumption that pressure and shame drive results. Managers raise targets, spotlight failures, and assume the scrutiny will push employees to perform at higher levels. The belief is that discomfort is the cost of excellence. Yet the research paints a different reality. Shame does not fuel effort, it interrupts it. Employees in shame-heavy environments often hesitate, delay, or avoid risks to protect themselves from embarrassment. Instead of more output, these teams see more time wasted on second-guessing and fewer voices speaking up with ideas. Silence and caution replace initiative. Far from unlocking potential, shame cultures lock it down. Consider what shame looks like inside the workflow. A team member doubts the reception of their idea, so they hold back in meetings. A manager harshly critiques a draft, so the employee spends hours over-polishing routine assignments. Instead of focusing on delivering results, energy is spent managing impressions and avoiding mistakes. One overlooked issue compounds quietly until it becomes a setback for the whole project. By the time someone is willing to raise it, the cost has multiplied. These patterns don't show up in a single metric, but their impact accumulates across budgets, timelines, and morale. Now, contrast this with workplaces that foster authenticity and psychological safety. In these environments, employees don't waste energy masking stress or hiding challenges. They speak openly about obstacles, ask for help, and admit when something isn't working. Those behaviors save time and reduce costly errors. Authenticity here is not about lowering standards. It's about removing the fear that mistakes define worth. Work is done more efficiently because people are no longer duplicating effort to protect themselves. The outcome is practical. Projects finish faster, teams respond more adaptively, and trust builds momentum rather than friction. The evidence supports this contrast. Surveys from 2025 show that when employees feel supported in their mental health, they're far less likely to describe their workplace as toxic and less worried about future job loss. Strong relationships with managers in particular correlate with reduced fears about toxicity and uncertainty. Where shame suppresses contribution, authentic relationships lift it. This doesn't just benefit well-being, it links directly to measurable outcomes like retention and engagement. Teams where employees feel free to express themselves are steadier, less likely to churn, and better able to sustain high performance over time. Stress leave is another area where shame leaves a financial footprint. Polling shows strong associations between stigma-heavy environments and greater stress-related struggles. When employees feel unsafe disclosing those challenges, they either burn out in silence or leave altogether. The ripple effects are costly: redistribution of workload to other staff, slower project delivery, repeated onboarding, and the loss of institutional knowledge. By contrast, in workplaces with mental health training and supportive management, fewer employees report shame eating into productivity, and fears of judgment sharply decline. That change protects not only health but continuity, a significant business benefit. Some leaders still argue that toughness maintains standards. They frame shame as discipline, assuming it weeds out weaker workers. But short-term competitiveness does not equal sustainable performance. Poll data shows that the most talented employees, those with the easiest options elsewhere, are often the quickest to exit shame-heavy cultures. They leave not because they couldn't cope, but because they see no reason to stay. Over time, companies relying on shame lose their innovators and retain only those who tolerate unhealthy environments. The loss of top talent undermines what these workplaces claim to protect: high performance. What makes the business case for authenticity so strong is that it delivers both soft gains and hard metrics. Employees who feel psychologically safe report better job satisfaction, but they also generate stronger results. Productivity rises not from overextension, but from the removal of energy-draining fear. Engagement improves, turnover slows, and creativity broadens precisely because people are willing to take risks without fear of humiliation. Clients notice responsiveness. Teams adapt quickly to change. Workers are present not just in body but in focus, no longer wasting hours protecting appearances. At its core, the difference is simple. In shame-based systems, employees spend valuable time and energy managing how they appear. In authenticity-based systems, that energy flows directly into work. The research validates this conversion. Workplaces with mental health training cut reported productivity losses nearly in half, 21% compared to 38%, while also reducing fears of judgment by 10 points. That is not a cultural luxury. It's a measurable performance advantage. Less fear means less wasted time. Less posturing means more progress, and that clarity translates into profitability. This is why it's increasingly clear that shame is not a minor HR issue. It's an organizational liability. It increases silence, burnout, and attrition. It erodes trust and stalls decision-making. Cultures that counteract it through training, open communication, and supportive management are not just kinder to work in, they are more competitive. They attract talent, they hold talent, and they gain efficiencies that shame-driven environments can't replicate. The bottom line isn't philosophical, it's financial. The mini payoff is straightforward. Shame-heavy workplaces burn resources. Shame-free ones conserve and compound them. The less time employees spend managing fear, the more time they spend creating value. And when that energy is reclaimed, both workers and organizations move faster toward their goals. This brings us to a deeper insight about what really drives efficiency. Removing shame doesn't just improve culture, it changes how quickly people can work. And the next step is understanding why being yourself often turns out to be the most practical advantage you have. Why being yourself makes you work faster. Most people hear the word authenticity and think it's about comfort, maybe even indulgence. The assumption is that being yourself at work is a privilege you earn only after proving you can handle the real requirements. First you fit in, follow the style everyone expects, meet the visible standards, and only later maybe you show up as yourself. But authenticity isn't a luxury. It isn't just about expression. It's one of the most efficient ways to work. Dropping the mask doesn't slow you down. It strips away the friction that eats time and energy without you realizing it. Think about the hours lost to image management. In meetings, you hesitate, rephrase, and edit yourself before speaking. In emails, you rewrite the same line multiple times to make sure it gives the right impression. In reviews, you highlight carefully selected stories because you assume that's what your manager wants to hear, even if it conceals where you produced your real value. Each choice adds hidden steps between thought and action. On paper, you're doing your job, speaking, writing, presenting. In reality, you're siphoning attention into maintaining a persona. Those detours add up, turning 10-minute tasks into half-hour ordeals. This same effort spills into long-term patterns. Pretending to enjoy work you dislike, mimicking styles that don't fit you, continually managing how others perceive you, all of it consumes more energy than the work itself. Living like that is like running in a costume too heavy for the race. The disguise slows you down, but you keep pushing, mistaking the exhaustion for dedication. Many careers run on this kind of hidden overhead, years of energy lost to performance management before the actual job even begins. Authenticity removes this drag. When the question shifts from how does this look to is this useful, decisions move faster. You don't spend hours smoothing out perfectly safe emails or rehearsing harmless comments. You speak directly, work directly, and iterate without needing constant layers of polish. That efficiency isn't because you lowered your standards, it's because you stopped adding extra steps created by fear. In practical terms, you reclaim hours every week that you were quietly spending on appearances. Recovery is another overlooked efficiency. All work involves rejection and critique. A client says no, a manager redraws your plan, a proposal falls flat. If you've tied your self-worth to a persona, those setbacks hit harder. They feel like a collapse not just of the project, but of the role you've been struggling to perform. The drop is deeper, and recovery drags longer. But if you approach the task as yourself, failure lands on the work alone. You can evaluate it without collapsing into self-attack. That clarity makes recovery faster, letting you adapt and re-engage without weeks of hesitation. Now look at the collective cost when these masks dominate a team. Meetings run long because people withhold clear points, hide disagreement behind politeness, or speak in layers of disclaimers. What could have been a direct exchange turns into a slow dance of appearances. In cultures that encourage authenticity and psychological safety, conversations move at a different pace. People speak plainly and respond to challenges without posturing. Disagreements are solved quicker, and fewer follow-up meetings are needed to clarify what wasn't said. The absence of masks creates speed because communication doesn't get stuck in pretense. This is where research lines up with lived experience. Studies highlight that authenticity correlates with reduced stress, stronger engagement, and higher trust. Those conditions matter because they change how long employees stay, how quickly they contribute, and how motivated they remain. Lower turnover and steadier commitment aren't abstract benefits. They translate into projects delivered on time and teams that don't waste cycles replacing talent. Authentic workplaces move faster, not just because individuals save time, but because the system stays stable enough to keep momentum. The paradox is that authenticity looks unstructured, just being yourself, but it creates the strongest consistency. When you no longer perform different versions of yourself for each audience, you don't waste time recalculating what role to play. A steady internal reference point means fewer distractions and quicker choices. Consistency operates like a hidden engine. Small, repeated gains that add up over months into more output, less stress. This also explains why light workloads sometimes create exhaustion. The exhaustion isn't from the tasks, it's from the constant shifting of personality, tone, and presentation to match shifting expectations. That energy drain is invisible on a task list, but you feel it acutely at the end of the day. Removing those costume changes lightens the load. The same easy day no longer feels like heavy labor because the unspoken adjustments have disappeared. Flow is another place where authenticity pays off. Flow depends on alignment, tasks that draw from personal strengths where attention can hold steady. Operating through masks interrupts that alignment. You start, hesitate, second guess, correct for image, and break concentration. What could have been 3 hours of focused progress fragments into intervals of doubt and restarts. Authenticity clears those interruptions. The gap between who you are and how you work collapses, making flow more accessible. More time in flow means more output without feeling forced or frantic. Concrete examples make this clear. Someone who writes every email in exaggerated corporate formality ends up overthinking small exchanges. Once they adopt their natural communication style, still professional but true to their voice, the process becomes fast and clear. Or take creative roles. Designers chasing every new trend can produce acceptable work, but often spend hours duplicating someone else's vision. The moment they work from their authentic style, the hours shrink and the result carries more impact. The overlap of self and task slashes wasted effort. Leadership magnifies this effect. Leaders who cling to rigid personas of authority spend effort maintaining an image. Every decision is filtered through what the role should sound like. Authentic leaders, by contrast, speak openly, admit limits, and decide without pretending. That consistency builds trust, and trust moves teams faster. Confusion drops, follow-up endless questions decline, and alignment strengthens without constant management. Authority built on a persona looks strong. Authority built on authenticity actually delivers results faster and more predictably. The persistence of the comfort myth around authenticity comes from misunderstanding. Many assume being yourself means lowering intensity, coasting, or picking ease over rigor. But the difference isn't in the difficulty of the work, it's in whether you spend energy on the work itself or on resisting it. Authentic challenges remain challenging. What changes is that you face them head-on instead of wasting effort layering doubts, disguises, or protective rehearsals. Speed comes from stripping away detours, not from skipping hard work. The irony, then, is sharp. Modern productivity advice often frames success as squeezing into tighter molds, optimizing habits, regulating weaknesses, matching outside models. Yet that approach often builds cages of performance roles that turn work into drag. Efficiency comes not from perfecting the role, but from discarding it. You already conserve time and energy the moment you stop performing for approval. The most effective version of you isn't the endlessly polished role player, it's the you that doesn't need to pretend. That isn't indulgence. That's the direct route to speed and sustainability. Which leads to the next challenge. Knowing authenticity improves performance doesn't automatically free you from the habits of shame. Those habits run quietly, shaping choices until they feel normal. To change them, you need tools to notice where shame still sneaks in and ways to shift those moments before they absorb your energy again. That shift begins with something surprisingly small, bringing into the open the very patterns shame would prefer to keep hidden. Techniques to break free from shame. Today, breaking free from shame isn't about waiting for a huge breakthrough. It starts with tools you can apply in everyday situations. Shame is persistent, but once you have techniques to call it out and redirect it, you stop giving it the control it thrives on. And when you start applying those tools, small shifts compound into real freedom over time. Shame's first advantage is invisibility. It lingers unspoken, sliding into your thoughts until you start mistaking it for truth. The first technique is to name it. Saying this thought is shame seems basic, but it is pivotal. This is what Brené Brown calls recognizing shame and its triggers. You can't change what you won't acknowledge. When you identify shame clearly, even by saying it aloud or writing it down, you weaken its hiding place. But recognition alone isn't enough. Brown also emphasizes reaching out and speaking it to someone who can listen with empathy. Sharing reduces shame's hold because it forces the critic out of your private loop. Saying, "I feel like I'm not good enough here" to a trusted colleague or friend doesn't amplify the problem, it shrinks it. Empathy is kryptonite for shame. It cannot survive in the light of connection. Still, naming shame or voicing it doesn't clear it away permanently. For many, the inner critic repeats, rehearsing the same loops. I should do more, I'm falling behind, I'm not capable enough. Recognition alone can become a spotlight on the struggle without providing a way out. That's why you need practical methods to interrupt the spiral and shift into a different frame. 3 daily techniques build this skill: self-audit questions, reframe self-talk, and 1 intentionally chosen want task. Each one makes shame stand still long enough for you to move past it. Self-audit questions are short checks you can apply in the moment. They pause shame before it cements into conviction. For example, if you feel guilty stepping away from your desk, pause and ask, am I neglecting something important, or am I preserving my ability to focus when I return? Or when you hesitate to submit work, ask, is this not ready, or am I worried someone will say it isn't good enough? The effect isn't instant freedom, but perspective. These quick questions reveal whether guilt comes from values or from fear of being judged. If it's the latter, you've exposed shame in the act. This is what practicing critical awareness looks like: the ability to test the stories you tell yourself against reality. Reframing self-talk is the second technique. Shame thrives on rigid, identity-based language. I'm failing, I'm broken, I'll never measure up. Small language shifts change how the brain processes setbacks. I missed today's deadline is fact. I'm a failure is shame. Replace it with, I didn't finish this one, but I can reset tomorrow, and suddenly the situation moves from an attack on who you are to feedback on what you did. Over time, this rewires how you respond to challenges. Self-compassion research shows that practicing kindness toward yourself in these reframes doesn't make you complacent, it strengthens resilience. By viewing difficulties as part of growth, setbacks lose their sting and no longer trigger prolonged spirals. Instead of draining your momentum, they feed your capacity to try again. The third technique is to carve out one want-based task every day, something you do out of genuine interest or meaning, not obligation. Shame grows strongest in environments full of shoulds. Entire calendars packed with obligations provide zero counterweight and leave little room for self-driven action. A want task changes that. It doesn't matter whether it's a major project aligned with your core values or a small moment like playing guitar for 10 minutes, sketching, or writing in a notebook for yourself. These tasks are daily proof that your time and energy don't belong solely to external expectations. They are reminders that your values direct your choices. Layered over weeks, this anchors your days with authenticity instead of shame. The strength of these practices isn't in dramatic gestures, but in repetition. Every audit question rescues a little clarity. Every reframe dismantles a piece of shame's false script. Every want task deposits a small token of authenticity into your routine. Over time, the internal voice that once dominated becomes background noise, a critic you notice without obeying. The impact extends into real-world outcomes. In fact, data from 2025 shows that workplaces offering mental health training saw far fewer employees report shame-harming productivity, 21% versus 38%. The same principle plays out individually. When you build tools to counter shame daily, you recover efficiency by patching the leak it creates. To picture this in practice, imagine a standard day. You scan your inbox in the morning and feel the familiar surge of guilt at unanswered messages. Shame tells you to drop everything and power through them all immediately, regardless of what matters most. Instead, you pause for a self-audit. Will I be more effective spreading these across the day than tackling them all at once? That single question undercuts the false urgency. Later, leaving a meeting, you hear the inner voice say, I sounded unprepared. Shame wants you to dwell on it for hours, but reframed self-talk resets the story. I wasn't as clear as I wanted, but I learned something specific to improve next time. And at the end of the day, beyond tasks you felt pressured to do, you give space to a want task, a few minutes developing a skill you chose. With these practices, the day contains not just defenses against shame, but visible evidence that your choices still belong to you. These tools matter for a deeper reason. Without them, shame quietly takes on the role of manager. Think about how many actions at work are driven not by importance, but by imagined judgment. The compulsion to respond instantly to messages stems less from collaboration and more from fear of appearing disengaged. Hours spent over polishing small projects rarely reflect their actual value. They echo the suspicion that anything less than perfection equals failure. Shame doesn't just lower morale, it takes command of your priorities. With tools in place, you reclaim judgment. Audit questions help you identify which actions serve values rather than fear. Reframing language flips the script so shame can't define your identity. A want task reminds you, daily, that your work doesn't exist solely to appease others. Instead of shame as manager, you put authenticity back in charge. Progress won't mean silence from your inner critic. Shame will still speak up. Some days it will still hold ground. But its authority weakens when you recognize and define it. Each time you practice these techniques, you build strength in choosing differently. Over weeks, shame's volume lowers not because it disappeared, but because you recognize its tricks, and the impact is practical. Work once slowed by hesitation flows again. Energy once drained by hidden fear now fuels real progress. Life doesn't become flaw-free, but flaws lose their power to paralyze. The payoff is simple. You move forward without carrying the extra weight. Your work becomes direct, tighter, cleaner, not because you grind harder, but because the quiet leak of shame is closed. And when productivity rises in this way, it feels natural rather than forced. Each day becomes proof that small, repeated acts against shame add up to real freedom. These internal practices make shame manageable, but there's another challenge. Even if you reshape your habits, shame doesn't only come from within. It often arrives from outside, through peers, managers, or even close friends who don't always welcome your shift. And when it comes from others, the pressure to slip back into old masks can be just as strong. Dealing with shame from others. When authenticity starts shaping the way you live and work, the challenge often shifts to how others respond. Dropping the mask may lighten your own load, but to people around you, it can feel disruptive. Colleagues, managers, and even friends may push back when you no longer conform to the expectations they relied on. Their discomfort often shows up as subtle shaming, remarks, pressure, or judgment designed to steer you back into familiar roles. This external shame can feel harder to handle than the inner critic, the internal voice you can learn to recognize as yours. External voices carry the authority of belonging, and rejection from others stings more deeply. Because human beings are wired for connection, the threat of exclusion easily tempts us to retreat into old habits. Without clarity and tools, others' shame becomes a powerful lever that can reset your progress without you realizing it. Workplaces illustrate this dynamic with particular clarity. Consider a manager who equates loyalty with long hours. When you decide to stop overextending and leave on time, not because you're disengaged, but because you've learned to guard your energy, the manager may frame your new boundary as laziness. Peers may reinforce the pressure silently by staying late, even when it isn't necessary. Research confirms that shame and blame in leadership don't spark improvement. They trigger defensiveness, withdrawal, and disengagement. Instead of motivating, they corrode initiative and trust. By contrast, accountability paired with supportive feedback sustains standards without shaming people into compliance. In contexts where managers make this distinction, employees stay engaged and focused rather than fearful or checked out. Responding effectively to external shame requires specific strategies. The first is boundary setting. Boundaries are not confrontations, they are lines of clarity. When you communicate that you step offline after a certain time, that you take breaks seriously, or that you approach projects in specific ways, you're signaling values rather than rebellion. Boundaries practiced consistently don't just protect you, they train others to interpret your choices as structure. At first, resistance is normal. But stability shows that your patterns are not defiance, they are your operating rules. Over time, those around you learn that your actions are predictable, not personal. Without these boundaries, shame enters unchecked. With them, it meets a filter. The second strategy is reframing criticism. External shame often arrives packaged as judgment about your value. You're not dedicated enough, not ambitious, or falling behind. The temptation is to absorb the wording into your identity. But reframing stops that absorption by asking, does this reflect my values or someone else's expectations? If someone accuses you of lacking ambition because you won't take an unnecessary overnight assignment, reframing clarifies the remark shows they equate ambition with sacrifice of rest. That's their framework, not a universal law. The sting changes once you see the comment as information about their perspective rather than evidence against you. This tool holds in personal life as well. If a friend mocks you for skipping a night out, the easy move is to feel boring. Reframing realigns the meaning. What they've revealed is their need for validation through group participation. Your decision reflects care for your energy, not dullness. It doesn't erase the hurt of being mocked, but it prevents adoption of the label as truth. From that angle, shameful words lose their authority and pass through without rewriting your self-perception. The third strategy is building a shame-free circle. Human beings cannot sustain authenticity in a context of constant exposure to shaming. It erodes stamina to keep swimming upstream forever. That's why consciously seeking supportive relationships is essential. This doesn't require a large network. Even one trusted colleague who endorses your authenticity can stabilize you in environments that try to shake it down. For some, it's a small peer group outside of work where shared values negate the need for performance. In these spaces, you confirm through direct experience that belonging doesn't have to be conditional on masking yourself. That experience strengthens your ability to withstand shame elsewhere. Communities like this do more than insulate you. They shift norms. When you demonstrate that authenticity does not collapse under shame, others notice. Often, they begin to relax hidden masks of their own. This ripple effect can change a workplace culture incrementally, from one person, then a small group, then gradually a redefinition of how commitment looks in daily practice. Shame thrives in silence and imitation. Once a few resist it openly, its power wanes. It's important to be clear that external shame will never fully disappear. Organizations, friend groups, and families include people deeply invested in traditional standards of performance. The change over time is not that shaming voices vanish, but that your relationship to them shifts. Boundaries, reframing, and community mean criticism no longer registers as truth. Instead, you see shame as a signal of what matters to others, not as a mirror of your identity. This separation makes space to respond thoughtfully instead of absorbing pain as proof you failed. Picture feedback delivered bluntly by a manager frustrated with your pace. In a shame-driven framework, you translate that frustration into identity. I'm not capable. You'd overcorrect on the next project, burning extra hours to avoid doubt. In an authenticity-driven framework, you interpret it differently. This shows what my manager prioritizes. I'll consider what adjustments make sense, but it doesn't define who I am. You still act, but shame doesn't seize control of your motivation. Adjustments happen in execution, not in self-worth. Or consider a personal example. Declining a social event can stir pressure from friends. Under shame, you attend tired, perform lightheartedness, and leave more drained than before. Under authenticity, you decline but extend connection later in a way that doesn't violate your energy. Friends who support that decision strengthen your inner circle. Those who ridicule it identify themselves as unsafe connections to distance from. The clarity is hard-earned, but it raises the quality of your relationships in the long run. Seeing external shame as data is a useful perspective. Every comment and judgment reveals more about the speaker's priorities than about your value. When someone equates productivity with staying late, they reveal the lens they use. When someone equates participation with loyalty, they show how they define belonging. Decoding external shame in this way detaches it from your identity. It becomes just another piece of information to weigh against your own values and goals. The practical gain in all of this is efficiency. External shame consumes time and energy when you treat it as a verdict on your worth. Boundaries, reframing, and supportive connections break that cycle. They don't protect you from criticism itself, but they prevent each remark from spiraling into hours of doubt. What might once derail a week becomes a small piece of data you process and move past. That saved energy directly translates into productivity. The mini payoff here is straightforward. External shame loses its grip the moment you stop translating it into identity. People may still criticize, but those criticisms no longer dictate your choices. The power shifts back to you, and once you begin operating from that stability, the question of direction comes into sharper focus. What you need then is not just protection from shame, but a framework for channeling your energy into goals that reflect your values without recreating old patterns of pressure. And this is where we turn next. From theory to action, shame-free goal-setting framework. Most goal systems you see today follow a predictable formula. They hand you steps, routines, or streaks that promise transformation if you simply keep up. At first glance, this looks practical, but the structure often comes at a hidden cost. These systems are built on external expectations rather than on values people truly care about. The rituals create short bursts of order but also trap you in pressure. And when life inevitably shifts, the system collapses, leaving you not just behind but convinced you failed. Falling off track becomes proof of inadequacy rather than a reminder to adjust. That is the flaw of rigid streak-based goal setting. Instead of helping, it quietly reinforces shame. Think of the long, aspirational lists many people write at the start of the year. They aim to rise at 5 every morning, read dozens of books, hit peak physical health, and deliver flawless results at work. It all looks motivating on paper. But as soon as a few boxes go unchecked, each gap is read as evidence of weakness. Conventional goal systems define success by strict adherence, which means even slight deviation counts against you. Miss a day, and the streak is broken. Life circumstances intervene, and the whole plan feels invalidated. The outcome isn't better discipline, it's self-blame. Rigid systems trade sustainable growth for fragile perfection. A more resilient alternative is what we can call shame-free goal setting. This framework is designed to keep structure while reducing the risk of collapse when conditions change. It has 3 main elements: orient goals toward values, design them around micro-steps, and build accountability that points inward rather than outward. What ties these pieces together is evidence from motivation research. Approach-oriented goals, those framed as moving towards something meaningful, perform better than avoidance goals that focus on escaping failure. Focusing on the process, daily behaviors and actions supports progress more reliably than fixation on outcomes. Implementation tools like habit stacking and if-then intentions help bridge the gap between desire and action. And crucially, building in slack with a small cost prevents perfectionism from turning missteps into shame spirals. These principles ground the framework in something more durable than willpower alone. The starting point is values. Goals must grow out of what matters internally, not out of borrowed metrics. This requires stripping away external noise and asking directly, what directions matter to me? Creativity, connection, health, growth, independence, these are not rigid demands but guides. Once identified, values allow for flexible expression. If the value is health, the related goal might be phrased as, I want to strengthen my stamina. That orientation keeps the options open: running, cycling, hiking, all valid ways of honoring the value. When a method fails, the value still holds, and shame loses its leverage. Life may interrupt a particular plan, but the deeper commitment remains steady. Goal systems rooted in values work because they are approach-oriented. You move toward what you want rather than away from what you fear. Micro-steps form the second element. Large ambitions easily intimidate because the scope is too wide. Shame thrives when the task looks unachievable from the starting line. By shrinking goals into concrete micro-actions, you remove that entry barrier. Instead of planning to complete a full book chapter, commit to 15 minutes of writing. Instead of mapping an entire career shift, engage with one article, one informational interview, or one small project. Psychologically, these immediate actions sidestep shame's story that progress is impossible. Each micro-step completed adds up to evidence. You can move forward even if slowly, and evidence accumulates into momentum. This connects to research on implementation intentions. If situation X arises, then I will do action Y. Linking small goals to existing routines or contexts, habit stacking makes them automatic and keeps the line between intention and execution short. The third element is accountability reframed. Traditional accountability relies on leaderboards, streak trackers, or external approval. Each gap or miss becomes fuel for comparison, but comparison is unstable. It shifts authority outward and strengthens shame. In the shame-free model, accountability is internal. It centers on reflection questions such as, did my actions this week align with my values? Notice the measure isn't whether every task was perfect, but whether intent and action matched. Some use quick journals that tally alignment, while others share reflections with a trusted peer who understands their values instead of their metrics. This type of accountability sustains agency. The measure of success belongs to you, not the crowd. Imagine 2 professionals navigating their year. The first adopts conventional goal setting with daily and weekly performance quotas. Illness interrupts for a week. Their clean streak breaks, lists remain unchecked, and shame rushes in. They view the gap as evidence they cannot keep up and spiral into avoidance. The second professional anchors goals to core values, stability, and creativity. Their micro-steps involve 1 outreach email per day and 2 blocks of time each week for creative work. They check in weekly to ask, did I act in ways that reflected stability and creativity? When illness interrupts, the framework bends rather than breaks. Micro-steps pause while health is restored, but values remain guiding. Progress resumes without the crushing weight of shame. The distinction isn't discipline, it's a system designed for resilience. One of the overlooked benefits here is motivation itself. Shame-driven goals operate on avoidance, keep moving, or risk feeling unworthy. This requires constant force and eventually drains energy. Value-driven goals pull rather than push. They connect to identity and meaning, which sustains interest even when motivation dips. Days of lower output don't erase the desire because the desire comes from alignment rather than fear. Progress feels lighter because the energy source is intrinsic. Relationships also benefit. In shame-based systems, others quickly become competitors or judges. Their success feels like a threat. But when goals are aligned with values instead of comparison, others' achievements don't diminish you. You measure success by different criteria, your own alignment, so collaboration feels safer. Instead of guarded or defensive, interactions open up. The absence of comparison creates room to build trust, which further reduces pressure. Another strength of this model is the built-in allowance for imperfection. Most systems collapse because they set a pass or fail threshold. One miss equals failure. A shame-free approach factors in grace with a cost. Miss a microstep? The plan allows recovery. You acknowledge the miss, reflect on the trigger, and reset without discarding the framework. The slack keeps progress moving without letting avoidance take over. It prevents the spirals that shame relies on while still asking you to return to action. This balance protects discipline while guarding against collapse. Think also about how this framework changes long-term persistence. Instead of peaks of discipline followed by burnout, progress holds steady. Every week's reflection reinforces alignment. Each small win counters narrations of inadequacy. Over time, identity shifts. You no longer see yourself as someone forcing goals, but as someone living increasingly in line with what matters. This identity-based reinforcement keeps momentum steady without rigid force. Consider a practical example. One person sets a streak goal, exercise 5 times a week, no exceptions. By March, a family emergency disrupts the streak. They feel failure, label themselves undisciplined, and abandon the plan completely. Another person frames the same outcome through values, health, and balance. Their micro-step is 15 minutes of activity whenever possible, stacked onto a routine like after breakfast. They track alignment weekly. Did I move my body consistently with my value of health? When disruption arises, they adjust duration or method. The core goal remains alive. Shame doesn't dictate the conclusion. Over a year, the second person logs steady, accumulative progress while the first stalls in shame. The larger payoff is this: goals become supports rather than cages. Discipline doesn't vanish, it shifts from chasing streaks to sustaining alignment. You are still structured, but the structure works with you. And the outcome is often more progress, not less. When you discard rigid formulas tied to external pressures, you stop investing effort in proving worth and instead invest effort in actual forward movement. Shame loses the role of judge. Values regain the role of guide. As this system becomes more natural, the contrast with conventional productivity culture sharpens. You notice how easily people overload themselves with tools, apps, and routines that multiply the pressure, but don't touch the real source of struggle. At that point, the question changes. Are you building goals that reflect your values, or are you stacking more systems on top of them out of fear? That distinction determines whether your progress feels authentic and sustainable, or whether you stay caught in the same exhausting cycle. From apps to authenticity, escaping the productivity hamster wheel. I'll admit it, I've downloaded more productivity apps than I'd ever want to count. Each time I hit a slump, I convince myself the answer lies in a new piece of sleek software promising to sharpen my focus. I'm not alone in this. Plenty of people collect these tools the way others collect sneakers. One look at a phone screen shows the lineup: time trackers, habit streak counters, calendar optimizers, note systems. But here's the irony: when the moment comes to actually do the work, nothing moves. The tools multiply, but progress doesn't. It's a hamster wheel disguised as strategy. The problem isn't that tools are inherently useless. The problem is the way they get pulled into the cycle of shame. Apps can sort, schedule, and track, but they can't neutralize the weight that keeps you from starting. In fact, the cycle often makes shame louder. You download a new app with hope, feel organized for a week, then life intrudes. You miss a task, skip a day, fall behind. The app responds with red notifications, broken streaks, and reminders you no longer want to open. The guilt builds. Soon after, the promise of yet another app starts to look like the fix. The cycle repeats: hope, organization, slip, guilt, search. At its core, the failure isn't the functionality. It's the belief that tools can fix what is really a question of authenticity. That's the deeper truth. Tools amplify what's already driving you. If shame is in the background, apps become vehicles for constant self-judgment. A planner becomes a ledger of proof that you can't keep up. A tracker turns into a siren announcing that you failed again. But if the work begins from values, your actual reasons for pursuing it, tools can extend progress instead of sabotaging it. The difference doesn't lie in which app you choose, but in what you carry into using it. A notebook in the hands of shame records missed deadlines like punishments. In the hands of authenticity, the same notebook marks steady evidence of meaningful effort. Think about how often hacks promise to change everything. A new method, timer setting, or elaborate routine sounds like an answer, but most hacks are just discipline repackaged. And when shame directs discipline, hacks don't remove resistance, they underline it. A day passes not in doing, but in setting up new systems. The feeling of control distracts from the absence of progress. Hours slip away, adjusting workflows, color-coding categories, or comparing features while the original task sits untouched. At the end, the wheel has spun, energy is gone, and shame has doubled. This is where a different question helps cut through the noise. Is this app helping you move or just helping you avoid starting? That simple reflection can expose what's really happening. Because tools are never neutral. They shave time when aligned with authenticity, but they waste time when they become avoidance dressed up as preparation. So how do you step off the hamster wheel? The first move is reversing the usual order. Instead of starting with apps or hacks and hoping they deliver motivation, start with clarity. What do you actually want to achieve, and why does it matter to you? Define the value first. Then, and only then, choose the minimum structure needed to hold yourself accountable to it. If your focus is creativity, maybe all you need is a basic calendar block protecting 2 hours each day. If your priority is balance, a reminder app to enforce breaks might be sufficient. Simplicity is not weakness, it's efficiency. Often a single tool chosen with purpose outperforms a dozen stacked out of fear. The second step is auditing. Every month, look at the tools and systems you use and ask one direct question: does this save energy or does it cost energy? If it supports you by freeing focus, keep it. If it weighs on you by adding guilt or offering more places to fail, cut it. Many people hold on to every system they've ever added, layering structure on structure under the assumption that more equals better. In practice, each extra layer creates more opportunities for judgment. By pruning back, you ensure the few key supports remain and the rest stop draining focus. Consider the example of a focus timer. Used shamefully, it becomes a whip, 12 hours of nonstop work, proof against the fear of laziness. That timer drains rather than supports. Used authentically, the same timer creates a 90-minute block for deep focus on tasks you actually value. At the end, you're not exhausted, you're satisfied. Nothing changed about the tool, only about the reasons behind its use. The same can be seen in habit trackers. For some, one missed checkmark feels catastrophic, proof that months of work are ruined. For others using the same app, a missed line isn't failure, it's feedback to reset the flow the next day. The difference is whether the tracker substitutes for self-worth or serves chosen values. The same surface, object either deepens shame or lightens accountability. It's worth noting that disengaging from the hamster wheel doesn't mean discarding all structure. Chaos won't move you closer to values either. What makes the difference is orientation. Are you setting goals and choosing tools from a defensive stance, trying to outrun a sense of inadequacy? Or are you doing it from alignment with meaningful ends, where tools become amplifiers rather than overseers? That distinction decides whether productivity feels like punishment or like progress. A practical reset can be as simple as trialing life with fewer tools. Strip back to the bare minimum: calendar, notebook, maybe one timer, and see how it feels. If your energy rises and the sense of guilt drops, that's useful data. If you miss certain structures, add them back consciously, one at a time, ensuring each serves your values instead of inflating shame. Take this as an ongoing experiment rather than a one-time fix. Functions will shift as your needs shift, but the core test remains consistent. Does this tool help me move forward, or does it fuel avoidance and criticism? The real escape from the hamster wheel isn't about finding the perfect app. It's about reclaiming the role of deciding how tools get used. Apps and hacks magnify what you bring into them. If you approach from fear, they amplify fear. If you begin from authenticity, they accelerate progress. That's why the real work begins not on your phone, but in clarifying values and recognizing shame. When that foundation is set, even simple tools become powerful allies instead of constant judges. The important shift, then, is learning to protect energy instead of multiplying systems. Tools are only ever multipliers. They can multiply motion when shame is in control, sending you around the wheel again and again. Or they can multiply purpose when aligned with values, letting you convert the same hours into cleaner, lighter progress. The decision of what they multiply is yours. And once that's clear, a bigger truth comes into focus. The drain on productivity isn't only the time we spend in tools. It's the silent cost of shame itself, the constant leak of energy and attention that undercuts even the best plans. That is where the real challenge lies, and it's the place we need to turn next. Shame drains attention and energy the way a leak drains fuel. You can apply effort all day, but as long as shame runs in the background, you never reach full capacity. The real shift isn't in stacking more apps or hacks, it's in deciding to show up as yourself. As Brené Brown reminds us, shame derives its power from being unspeakable. Naming it reduces its grip. So here's your challenge. Spot one shame-driven habit today and replace it with one authentic choice. Share yours in the comments, I'd love to hear it. And if this helped, subscribe for more shame-free productivity tools.